In the heart of the northern forests, where the snow does not melt even in spring, and the trees creak as if they groan, a whisper was born. It did not belong to a man, but it could not be called a beast either. It was a hunger that had become a creature. In a time older than the writings, when winters lasted longer than life and hunting ended empty-handed, people used to say that in those woods there roamed one who was a man, but had become more or less. They didn't know for sure, but they whispered one name, Wendigo. It was said to have appeared in an hour of dire need. One of the tribe, his name is lost, was cut off during a blizzard. No game, no fire, just the gnashing of the wind and corpses frozen in the snow. He didn't survive. He crossed the line. He ate the flesh of the dead and then the flesh of the living. With each bite, he lost not only his humanity, but the warmth of his soul. His heart froze, his eyes darkened, and his body stretched as if it carried the curse itself. He had become one who sought not food, but the lives of others to sustain his undead. But the scary thing was different. He wasn't dying. He didn't age. He never rested. He felt hunger always. It was said that even the spirits of the forest retreat when the Wendigo comes. He could not be stopped with weapons, could not be appeased with prayer. His nature is a punishment for greed, for man daring to eat his own kind to survive. And so he is eternal hunger, eternal winter, eternal too much. And ever since, in every blizzard, in every crackle of snow behind them, people have heard him approaching. He didn't shout. He wheezed in other people's voices. The tribes living near the borders of the ice forests quickly realized not everyone who goes out into the storm comes back as themselves. Sometimes strangers in familiar skin came, with eyes like ice slits, with hands that trembled not from the cold, but from the beast held inside. Their speech was confused, their breath was vaporous, as if from the depths. The elders knew something else had taken possession of these men's bodies. The Wendigo did not always look like a monster. Sometimes he lived inside. The rituals began. When a man returned from the forest alone, he was greeted with apprehension. He was tested, not for wounds, but for hunger in his eyes. They gave him meat and watched. If he ate with restraint, humanly speaking, he was rescued. But if he lunged, swallowed greedily without discernment, he was killed. No screaming, without regret. Because the infection of Wendigo is not in the bite, but in the thirst for consumption, which no longer knows the measure. So fear became a ritual, and memory became a weapon. Shadow hunters have appeared, men whose job it was to find those in whom the beast was ripe. They wore no feathers, only bones. Their spirits were cold but precise. They did not doubt, because they knew that if they let one in, it would infect the village in silence. A Wendigo doesn't rush in immediately. He waits, he hides, polite, courteous, until night falls and his hunger rises like the moon. And then it's too late. That's why fear became a shield and cold became a warning. The Wendigo wasn't just a monster. He had become a spirit, an eternal reminder that greed always pays. His name was never spoken unnecessarily. It alone could draw an icy breath from the north. The sages said, the Wendigo is not a being, but an embodied consequence. Its seed is already ripening in everyone who is ready to cross the line for survival. It is not by chance that its appearance was associated with hungry times. It does not attack. It is born out of us. According to legend, the spirit of the Wendigo is as thin as ice over a river. It can enter a person through a dream, through a glance, through one wrong word spoken at a campfire, and from that moment, rebirth begins. Not sudden, but gradual. The man becomes quieter. His gaze goes to the ground. His voice grows dim. His family no longer recognizes him. He increasingly looks at others not as brothers, but as prey. Hunger is not a feeling, it's a call. So Wendigo became part of the rituals of growing up. The young were told not only how to hunt and survive, but also how not to turn. They were taught to see subtle signs, a look of emptiness, greedy hands that would not share. In these details lived fear, but not irrational fear, but wise fear. Because the Wendigo is not a beast in the darkness. It's a beast in a man who's been fed selfishness for too long. And if you don't look inward, you'll wake up one day with his face. It is said that once a group of hunters went deeper than the spirits allowed. They were led not by need, but by greed. They heard that behind the ridge there were wild herds untouched by the hand of man. They did not return. Only one came back, gray-haired, empty-eyed, his face scratched by branches and time. He did not speak. He screamed in his sleep. They fed him and fed him, but he kept shivering. And only once, when the fire burned out, he whispered, "He was among us." We let him in. A legend was formed from his stories. One of the hunters began to change. First he ate more than everyone else, then he withheld meat, and finally he disappeared. When they found him, he was standing over the body of his comrade, his hands bloody, his mouth soiled. He didn't throw himself, he was smiling. The Wendigo, the old man said, does not always transform completely. Sometimes he just takes a voice, a body, and goes on as if everything is fine. And then, in the night, he starts hunting. From that day on, the place was called Cursed Ridge. Even the birds avoided it. And everyone who heard the old man's story felt something dark stirring in him. Because in every man there can be a Wendigo. And the question is not whether you'll meet it. The question is whether you will not become him when winter comes and you are alone. Over time, the Wendigo ceased to be just a campfire horror story. It became part of the very fabric of the worldview of many tribes in northeastern America, especially the Algonquins. His spirit was considered one of the most dangerous, not because it is powerful, but because it lives in the shadows of human nature. It could not be banished, only kept in check. That's why many rites and taboos were born not from superstition, but from the understanding that if you lose the measure, the Wendigo will start breathing in you. In exorcism rituals, shamans used fire, ashes, and prayers directed not at the monster, but at the hunger within the person. The Wendigo was a spirit of gluttony, of insatiability, of selfishness. In a world where resources were scarce and winter was unforgiving, it was not a mythical threat, but a very real one. And it was because whoever broke the communal rules became a suspect. Hence arose the cult of self-restraint, not in the name of the gods, but in the name of survival. Over time, the tales escalated. Wendigo grew taller and taller, his skin cracking with frost, his ribs bulging, and his eyes falling into black hollows. He no longer looked like a man, he looked like a memory of him. That was the power of myth. It grew with fear. And anyone who heard the story of the Wendigo knew that it was not just a tale of a monster. It was a warning that came from the depths of winter and from within the soul. When Europeans came to the lands of the Algonquin peoples, they did not immediately realize what they were up against. Their faith was based on books and order. But here, in the vast forests, the laws were different. The missionaries heard stories of the Wendigo, thought they were pagan horror stories, but then the hunters would disappear. Bodies were found, gnawed, mutilated, and even the most hardened skeptics began to whisper, maybe it's not just fear. For fear here walked on two legs. Some colonial physicians attempted to describe the phenomenon scientifically. Thus came the concept of Wendigo psychosis, a condition in which a person, even with access to food, is suddenly possessed by a lust for human flesh. There were few cases, but each was accompanied by horror and rituals of destruction. It wasn't madness. It was the frontier of myth and medicine. And it was cracking under the weight of the winter forest. Thus, the Wendigo went beyond the tribal consciousness. It became not only a spirit, but a term, a subject of study, a cause of fear among those who believed in neither spirits nor demons. And yet, even in the reports of doctors, even in the scanty lines of newspapers, the same essence resounded. In these parts, there is something that feeds on the weakness of man. And if you want to survive, first of all, don't let hunger get the better of you. The age of electricity and machines hasn't banished the Wendigo. It just got quieter. He was now called by different names: legend, folklore, psychosis. But the disappearances continued. The forest still swallowed lonely travelers, and the winter nights brought the unexplained. Strange details appeared in the police reports. There were no signs of a struggle, but the bodies were mutilated. Not beast, not man. Something that knew where to strike. The Wendigo had changed forest trails to forgotten corners of the mind, but he hadn't gone anywhere. The locals, especially the old people, continued to set traps not for animals, but for shadows. They put salt at the door and ashes at the window. And if there was a child in the house, they hung a bone at the headboard so that the spirit would not take his soul. This behavior was explained by tradition, but in reality, fear didn't disappear. It only became a habit. After all, when winter creaks underfoot, you want to be sure you are not alone in the forest, but you're not with him either. And in the cities, people laughed. They told Wendigo stories like campfire stories. But as soon as you went outside the world, where the snow was a wall of snow, where there was no signal and the sky hung low, the laughter disappeared. And if suddenly, in the middle of the forest, you heard the crack of a branch, do not scream, because if he's near, he's already heard. And so there's only one thing left for you to do. Don't let the fear break through. The 21st century has not forgotten the Wendigo. It has given him a new face. Now he lives in horror movies and games and comics. His image, a distorted creature with horns, icy skin, gaping eyes. But most importantly, He's still just as thirsty. He has become a digital myth, a monster of the modern world where fears hide behind screens. People no longer believe in spirits, but in symbols. And the Wendigo has become a symbol of insatiability, of destruction, of loss of self. In movies, he haunts the mountains. In games, he haunts abandoned camps. In stories, he haunts the minds of those broken by hunger or isolation. But the essence remains the same. He comes when man loses his boundaries, when desire becomes uncontrollable. He is not just a monster, he is a mirror, distorted but true. And even in pixel graphics or cinematic horror, he is still the same ancient fear, which means the myth is alive. And everyone who turns on a Wendigo movie, who reads about him at night, who jokes about him in the comments, let him know fear is an invitation. And if there's an anxiety stirring somewhere inside you when you hear that name, that means he's still powerful. Because the Wendigo isn't just wars. He becomes anyone who can't get enough. Today, the Wendigo is increasingly referred to not as a monster, but as an archetype. He lives not in the forests, but in consumer cultures where not enough has become the new religion. He is recognized in figures willing to destroy for profit, in systems that consume people. The Wendigo is not just a cannibal, it's someone who can't stop. Someone who eats and is never satisfied. So, an ancient spirit has become a modern diagnosis of civilization. Psychologists say Wendigo is a metaphor for pathological greed. When you already have everything, but you want more, and it is this more that eats away at your soul. Social thinkers point out he is a symbol of ecological catastrophe, of immense consumption, of the corporate beast. His ribs are like withered forests. His eyes as empty as cities after a crisis. He no longer hides. He enters the office with a tie and a smile. But the myth warns, the Wendigo is not defeated by the sword. He is defeated by measures, by honesty, by boundaries. Where there is a boundary, he will not pass, because it feeds on the infinite. And if you want to stop him, you don't look for him in the snow. You have to look in the mirror. It's closer than it looks. And if you recognize that, you've already won the first battle. Myth doesn't die. It changes its appearance. Wendigo no longer whispers only among the pines. He is in books, in movies, in memes, in the anxious dreams of those who fear not the external, but the inner beast. His image has become universal, from the Arctic tundra to urban legends. He is the shadow of progress, a reminder that convenience and greed are always paid for. Even if not in blood, then in humanity. His ribs are now gaps in morality. His breath is the cold of loneliness in crowded megacities. He stayed with us because we still haven't learned to stop. We want more. Food, power, attention, resource. And in that hunger, he comes alive. The Wendigo is not evil. He's a consequence. Like Ragnarok in the Scandinavians or the apocalypse in the Bible, he comes not because he wants to, but because we call to him without knowing it. Which means the Wendigo story continues. Not in the forest, but in every decision where you can choose a measure and choose it not in favor of yourself. In every myth about him resounds not just a horror, but a lesson, because If you forget the myth, forget the fear, one day it will return, not as a spirit, but as you. And then, in the silence of the night, there will be the sound of gnashing again, not of jaws, but of guilt. And again, someone will whisper, the Wendigo is back.